out there.
Yes.
Okay. This is how we do it. That's interesting. It's my very first time on YouTube.
It's been really successful. We get, a good kind of 150 people. So 130, 140 people watching each broadcast, which is really interesting, actually. And it's done a lot for...
It's out there.
Yeah, it's done a lot for attracting partners, actually, industry partners and potential students and all sorts. So it's been really good. And all the other courses are copying us, so it must be good. Right, I'm going to press record on the Zoom as well.
Brilliant.
Karen, it's your turn to do the introduction. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I say hello. And then...
Yeah.
So hello, everybody. We're just getting ready. It'll take us a few minutes to let everybody come in, and then we'll start our Service Design TV Practitioner Talk. I'm perfecting my TV host.
Very nice.
It looks like I'm the only one in the Service Design TV studio though, Clive.
It does, doesn't it? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's terrible of me. I better match you.
I'm curious, what are you going to be?
I'm going to be that. I think it's plurality, isn't it? I think it is. We have these symbols that reflect the values of the course, but I can never quite remember which symbol is which. I think you're creativity, aren't you, Carolyn?
That might be the case.
It's quite intimidating when we go on calls with other courses like LBS or Imperial, and we all turn up with this wall of yellow or blue, depending what mood we're in.
I think yellow is for first years and blue is for second years. Is that right?
Okay. Good tip. Hello, everybody. We're just giving it a couple of minutes. If you're watching the recording on YouTube or watching us live, just bear with us. Hello, everyone joining on our Zoom. I'll be handing over to Carolyn any moment now. It's quite a nice day in the UK.
Really?
It was last year. Where are you?
Are we in the same country? Yeah, no, I'm here.
Compared to last week, anyway.
To last week.
Sure.
Okay, we've got a good number of students coming in, so just give it another minute and then we'll get started. Okay, welcome everybody to Service Design TV if you're watching on YouTube. Welcome to students if you're watching on Zoom to our practitioner talk. It's today, what is it? Wednesday the 17th of February already. I'm going to hand over to Carolyn, who's going to introduce our guest speaker for today. But thanks everyone for joining us and have a great talk. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks, Clive. Hello, everyone. I'm Carolyn Runcie, the Programme Manager and Tutor on our Masters in Service Design programme at the Royal College of Art. And I'm really delighted to welcome Chin Han from STBY today, who's a design researcher with STBY. And I was just looking, Tian, at your background, which is fascinating and in many ways has many similarities in some ways, the early points of some of our students. That sort of really reflects the multidisciplinarity needed in service design and service innovation. So, more recently, before starting out professionally, you took you've been a user experience architect, service designer, you're now a design researcher, but then studying service design, you did the first PhD in service design in the UK in 2010. So I was saying to Clive earlier, you pipped us to it, and we've since started our program, and we have our own PhDs now, but I think you were in many ways leading the way. And of course, way back when you were studying in China, you studied in computer science. So a really fascinating melee of disciplines and your experience. So we're really looking forward to hear a little bit more about what you do at STBY now in design research, what that brings to your work in service innovation, and a little bit about how you've all adapted as a team during the last year or so. So thank you again, and over to you, Chin.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. So, hi everyone, this is Chin. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. Is it working?
Yes, that's looking good. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, there we go. Lovely. So hello. So here I'm here today to talk a little bit about design research. So it's it's a half an hour talk, so obviously we're not going to get into every single details of it, but I hope I provide some tips and food for thought, and also I'll provide some resources for anyone who wants to just dive into this a bit later. A little bit about STBY. So I work as a design researcher for this company, and it's a very small company with 2 offices and 8 people in total. And we are all research specialists with some level of design skills. So all of us are researchers, but we work a lot with clients who have their own design teams. So we work with designers in almost every project. And also, as Caroline just mentioned, that I myself come from a UX design background. A lot of my colleagues also, they have graphic backgrounds, but also some were trained as ethnographers or journalists. So it's a very multidisciplinary team to start with. Just to introduce our work a little bit, we'll get into the details a bit later. So the work is always centered around people. So we study people. But also not just as objects, but also we are very keen on co-create with them to bring people into the design process, and then make sure that everything we learned from them is also used at different stages of the design process. So it's very important, I think, for design research that's different from most of general ethnographic research, is that the findings are translated into design decisions. And increasingly, we're involved in global projects where multiple markets are investigated with one methodology. So as I said, it's a very small company, but also we are part of a much wider network of design researchers where we can collaborate and deliver projects with similar methodologies across many different locations. I think for this presentation, I'm not going to go into too much details about global work, but if anyone's interested in that, do feel free to ask about it in the Q&A session at the end. So let's jump in straight. A few basics about design research. So we have a few almost guiding principles we use working at STBY. And I believe you're probably familiar with most of these, being on a service design course. So I'll keep them brief. So the first one is obviously people, human is at the center of our studies. I mean, before the pandemics, that's very typical of field work in the field. We go out and meet people in real life, in their homes, in their workspace, in a cafe, and then sometimes they come to our studio as well. And it's really about getting to know the people that we talk to. And I think it's very important to build that rapport for quantitative research. And then it's not just a collection of stories. It's also about talking to people with with research questions, with designed or scripts. Obviously, we always have scripts, to actually really understand insights and engage people in conversations and help to give their voice an impact in the design process later on when we bring all these insights back together. It's about understanding people holistically, knowing that no human being is in isolation. People have friends, family, work colleagues, and also the wider community that they live in. When we study people as users, it's also about understanding their relationship and how their behaviors and their attitudes were influenced by all these other people around them. And also, I mean, increasingly studies are not always on a single person. We have studied family as a unit, or teams, so in a sort of like work environment. So understand that people's experience is holistic, and you can't sort of like study people's behavior and their beliefs, outside the bigger environments they live in. And also the design, I mean, another principle is co-creative. So it's about empowering participants to speak out, where we use, a range of narratives and use visual methods. So we can see here on this slide, it's also, it's a co-creation session where it's, like I said, it's not about studying people as objects, but bringing them into the process and give them the language and the tools that they need to actually help designers making decisions. But on the other side, it's also about bringing the designers to the people and even other stakeholders. So we always invite clients to come along, and they can also bring around designers, engineers, software developers, or even like marketing strategists, basically wider stakeholders. They can come along as observers and sometimes even join the conversation with participants. And also it's about evidence, because it's, after all, it's research. So what you can see here is that we also create, and this is a lot of us when we get to use our creative skills and design skills to actually create prototypes and create visual evidence for people to better illustrate their experiences and talk about what they like, to talk about what their experience was like, or what they want their experience to be like. And then the last one is sequencing, is that often you would, with research, obviously it's with budget and the time scales, you could only study moments of people's lives, but also by covering a range of people in, a range of moments that they have, then we will be able to put together a sequence of actions and decision points. And then, from there, you can build on, identifying pain points, build on ideations for, finding gaps and all that. So, the format, these sequencing can take place. There are many different ways. User journey is a quite typical one. Blueprint is another. I'm sure you're quite familiar with some of these, the tools it's used. But in terms of guiding principles, these five are five that we always keep at the heart for any design research projects. And also, one thing is that as researchers, when we are asked to join a project, it's likely that it's not called a service design project. So the project we get pulled into has many different names, but we recognize that the underlying guiding principles, the five ones I mentioned, are actually very similar for all of these ones that you can see: agile innovation, social innovation, design research, or service design, whatever name they gave to it. And most of these terms have emerged simultaneously from different disciplines in the past 10, 20 years, but they're all looking to express the same almost like a transformation towards a design process that's more transparent and more human-centered. They want to reflect a lot more about the people who's actually in these service systems that we're going to create and improve. So instead of the most like traditional innovation as a black box approach, I mean, that was sort of like many years ago. So it's I think it's also very important that we don't get too hung up on names. To call this is what I do. So what I do is social innovation, and what you do is service design. I think as practitioners in the emerging field, we are actually quite flexible and embracing the complexity and different ways that we phrase what we do. To different audience, that's sort of like receiving our messages. It also means we get to sort of like collaborate with many disciplines to create these new services. So our client can sit in like any one of these departments, and they will probably have stakeholders that sit in another department. So a big part of our job is to make connections. And like I mentioned earlier, to translate our research findings for the wider team to work on it. So for example, if we find a behavior pattern or some unmet needs around a topic, say like, how people listen to music on your phone. The next question immediately coming back is, what does that mean for designers? What does it mean to the tech team? What does it mean to the marketing and business strategist? And this also means that we will need to be really clear in the way we communicate. And also we need to meet different people at different stages of the design process. So now we mentioned the process. This is actually a process we use at STBY. It's a triple diamond process, and it should be quite familiar to people because it's built based on the double diamond. And what happens is that basically everyone, so different people from different departments, will go through this process altogether, but different experts might lead different parts of it, and then others sort of like come along to contribute or even just to be in the loop. And we find this sort of a metaphor of divergent and convergent is very helpful. So for example, in the field work, when we are out interviewing or doing diary studies, in the divergent stage, we need to stop ourselves and sometimes our clients from jumping into conclusions too quickly here. And you have to trust the process. And the same thing with convergence. So if we're in analysis stage where we need to stay focused and make sure that we can agree on what's the key insights with core clients or key stakeholders before we start to generate ideas or solutions. Because it's very important that everyone knows which stage you're at. Otherwise, you confuse yourself and you confuse your teammates really quickly. I mean, everything is very nice and neat when you put them into models, but the reality, feels often more messy. And so this is often what I actually feel in research projects. So a lot of confusion. But also you need to remember that you have to sort of like approach research in a constructive way and trust the process. If you have designed it well, if you have outlined your research questions, agreed on priorities beforehand, you will reach these divergent milestones and you will be probably lost in a lot of design ideas again, but you can find ways to converge in them again and then move on. So, I mean, I think one of the things I think my director often says is like, we get lost 3 times a day in our work. But I think once you get used to it, that it's okay to be confused. We will come out. And another thing that's quite interesting is often people come to us because they see a tool and they're like, oh, we should do diary study or we should do a co-creation session. But actually from our experiences, we're more like, well, we need to look at the principles and the process first. There are many tools. out there in the world, and the new tools are being introduced all the time. We ourselves keep creating and modifying, things for each of our projects. So I think for anyone who's sort of like starting a research project, it's important to actually spend time thinking about two things. So one is, what is a research question? So what do you actually want to find out, when you go out? And the second thing is, how are you going to capture the answers if you bring that question to the real world? And once you are able to answer these two questions, then you can actually pick a tool. And there are so many tools out there. There are literally like hundreds and thousands of tools that you can use at different stages of the design process. This slide is just a few sort of like usual suspects that we often use in our projects. Many tools can be used at multiple stages. Towards the end of this presentation, I will also introduce you to a toolkit that STBY has helped to create. So it's free, and there was hundreds of different tools that you can pick based on what you're trying to do. So I'm not going to get into too much details about that. But basically what I'm saying is, don't get too hung up on a specific tool. Knowing what you want to get out of this research stage needs to come first. And you need to agree it, as a team. So I think it's also like nice and abstract. So let's look at some examples. So here I'm showing a few examples that we worked with Spotify. So it's a music streaming service, if you don't know. And we've explored a few different aspects of music listening and people's experiences of using Spotify. So I'm not going to get into too much details about the briefs themselves, but what I want to show you is that sometimes you can adapt things really based on your research questions and what you're trying to find out. So the first example here, you can see, is actually a workshop. So it's a workshop we designed to explore how people describe their music taste. So the project sits at the very beginning of a discovery stage, where it's the aim of the research is to set the foundation for the design team to understand the mindset of people, having sort of the mindset people have around music categorization. And the material we used and find out would later inspire new design principles on the use of imagery, color, or language they use to describe music on Spotify's app. So here you can see it's a very sort of foundational and exploratory research, because we're really trying to understand how people think. And music taste can be a very abstract thing to discuss. So what we did is, during the workshop, we designed a few different exercises. So on the top right, you can see it's sort of like, I think it was we paired participants up to let them sort of like interview each other, finding out about how they describe the music they have listened to in the past and what they're listening to now. And then sort of almost like writing down to see how other people would perceive one person's music taste and the language they use. Another exercise on sort of like bottom right, and that was one of these like a visual mood board we asked people to create to describe their own music listening experiences. And there's another experience, so another experiment was sort of like looking at timelines of how people's music taste evolve over time, from probably like, teenager into their 20s and then moving on. And then we obviously in that process, we captured a lot of language that people used, or visuals or references people used to describe their music listening experiences. So this is a sort of like a workshop, and you can call it a co-creation workshop, where we used all of these different exercises and visual prompts to help people giving the type of information we need and to then translate into, use of imagery, principles of use imageries, or like design principles for the design teams. And then we also have another example that's actually, oh, the slide is not going. Okay, the text is missing. Anyway, but I mean, this example is actually a different project, but we are involved in the middle of the second diamond. So this is when the design team has already got some concepts, and they want us to sort of like help them narrowing down. And this is more of a validation research rather than an exploratory one that I just showed you earlier. So what we did here is we used a combination of two methods. The one on top is a diary study, where we actually asked participants on this project to download a beta version. So they have already developed a few things, and then they used it for a week before they come to join us in a co-creation workshop. And then during that week, we asked them to keep a diary, and also we simply send them a few prompts to ask about their experiences of using that prototype. And then they come to the workshop to actually discuss collectively what they have experienced and what they find is working and what they find is not. And obviously you can see on the table, there's a few like similar, I mean, the look is quite similar, where we prompt people and we design a few exercises to take people around to talk about certain specific things like the use of imagery, or how they actually see the information hierarchy between the different pages that we have given to them. But although they are both co-creation workshops, but what you can see here is that you can actually modify the actual content, the questions you ask within each session to actually use a similar tool or combine a few similar tools to meet the needs of different stages in the design process. And the one thing I want to point out is that, why is this going now? Strange. Okay, for both projects, we did analysis session with the core client team, who are really close to the research questions, and they know the material that's generated in the fieldwork quite well. And with their input, we basically pulled all insights together and trying to find repeating patterns in either the ways people describe their music taste or in behavior patterns, so how people actually used certain parts of the prototype. And also we identified a few gaps that people might experience as pain points, or they would say actually, this is missing from the prototype you gave to me. I was expecting that, but it doesn't happen. And if it has come up maybe in different wording, but from multiple people, then it's a recurring pattern. So we sort of put these together and make sure that we prioritized also in the analysis session, the synthesis session, is that you make sure that you prioritize what's really important insights here. What is really worth discussing with your design team. Because from one research, it is possible that you find so many insights and every one of them looks really exciting. And it's really important to actually step back and actually think, go back to your research question and what are we actually trying to do here? And then use your research question to guide you through that very important prioritization process to make sure actually the insights you came up in the end are the key insights. They are not just any insights. Okay. And then we delivered another session with a wider team to engage with more stakeholders. So these can be designers, strategists, or tech experts, and they would come into the session and learn about the research findings. And then in that session, they generate ideas in a cross-discipline setting. where we will be able to actually see how different, if you have one insight about certain behavior in music listening, the design team might find it really exciting and can generate a lot of ideas there. But at the same time, the tech can actually see, oh, actually, a lot of them has a lot of problem to actually implement. So I think I have almost like a little tip probably for student projects where you may not have, you may not have that level of engagement with a client team or a design team. Is really try to keep the analysis session and your idea generation session separate. Better to have, spend a night's sleep on it before you start ideation, because it's two very different mindsets. When you're analysis, you are breaking things apart and then you're regrouping them together. And you're not thinking about solutions. You're thinking about what it is that I actually find. But in idea generation session, you are now looking at possibilities of solutions. And if you try to do these two things together, it's very confusing, and people get frustrated very quickly. So that's sort of like a small tip. And I know many of you probably have questions about remote research. Now everyone's locked up in a room somewhere. So I'm going to share just some tips. Remote research itself as a topic is probably like a 2-3 hour lecture itself. And so I will only touch on a few sort of like brief things here. So in terms of format, in the past year, we have used, I think, slightly different methods, but they can loosely fall into these 3 categories. So online interviews are not face-to-face, but via format. It can be Zoom, it can be WhatsApp, and here. Oh, okay. And also another form is online workshop. That's I guess a lot of you are familiar with. So it usually involves using like one of these like digital whiteboard. I think there's one called Mural, there's one called Miro, there might be other ones out there. And then a third one, which is probably a little bit less known, is sort of like mobile ethnography, or sometimes it's phrased as probe study or diary study. And these are when you send questions, prompts, or sometimes images or video clips to the participants. They responded to these things at a time that's convenient to them. So the conversation is not live. And we have used actually for different projects a combination of some of these or sometimes all of these. For remote research, it is actually quite interesting because especially with like diary study and the probe study, that you can actually leave things with people and they have that time to think about how they want to respond. So they don't have to sort of like almost like find an answer just on the spot while everyone else around the screen is waiting for your answer. So we actually find a combination between a sort of like live session where you have a live interaction with people that you build the rapport, works quite well with then almost like the probe study or the diary study where you set a few things for people to chew on and think about when they're not on a sort of like live situation with you. There's also a few tips, I think, when we do remote research. I think remote research itself is actually quite a big topic. It's not simply about sort of like I usually do interview and now I just shift it online. It's a bit more complicated than that. The first tip I would give is really try to keep things sweet and short. People's attention span is actually relatively short when they're facing a screen compared to, like physical conversations. When we used to do field work in people's house, or like especially on location ones, it can last from 90 minutes to 2 hours. Where also we will be walking around with the participants. We might pick up cues or topics, or when we're looking at their living environments or their working environments, and then start a conversation from there. Where when you're in front of the screen, obviously all you see is their upper body and their face, and it's very difficult to pick up that kind of cues. And this is where things like diary studies, if you prompt them a few questions before leading into this interview, it gives you some of these clues before you head into an interview with someone. What we find is if you're doing a one-to-one interview, try to keep it within 30 minutes. Longest 40 minutes. I think after 40 minutes, people's minds just go off. But if you have prepared well beforehand, if you have find ways to feed them, to warm up to the topics, leading into this sort of like online 30 minutes, it's actually very efficient because you save time from both ends to get into the location and all that. So that sort of like leads up into the second point I have here, is think about things that you can do in advance. So make sure you make the most out of that 30 minutes you have with someone. You can send them NDAs to sign beforehand. You can send them a few sort of like food for thoughts or warm up, like short clip to warm up to them to the topics. Or if your timeline and budget allows, try to design a little probe study or diary study beforehand is advisable. And the next one is really test. So again, one thing we find is that it's very easy for people to get confused when they're on Miro boards or when they're sort of like using technology. You often lose the body language indication of what we're trying to do there. So it's very important to actually test your research script or your session with someone who doesn't know your project that well, to get a sense of where you might be misleading people or where you might be actually jumping a bit too much in your script. I used to have a client who says it's like eating your own dog food to get a taste. So for you, it can be that you can get another classmate who's not on your project to run a remote session with them to actually see where you might lost them and where they might come across a technical issue as well, and you can return the favor by taking part on one of their sessions. Linking to that is the use of online workshop is getting a little bit more common now, but compare that to a real life session where it's because it's quite different when you are guiding a few people through a process. If you compare that to one-to-one interviews, you have a lot more time and attention to guide people. And sometimes people are a bit confused, not sure what to do. If they're in a real life session, obviously they can just watch what all the other participants were doing and then they just do the same. Where on an online workshop, I think it's actually quite helpful to have a tech support people. So amongst your team, you might decide that this, like you will be the facilitator, you will be the note taker, and then another person is actually a tech support, who can actually pick up signs like which one of the participants is not really active, to actually see is there any problems or if they are experiencing any tech difficulties. With Miro boards and Miro boards, we also sometimes come across people who had difficulty accessing or seeing what's happening. So the tech support can then also share the Miro boards on their screen, and then ask the person who couldn't see that Miro board to say, actually, if you want to add some things onto the board, I can type it for you. So that kind of support, it's good to have that as a backup. And it's sort of leading to my last point, is really always be ready to adapt your tech or your tool in a remote situation. So if there is a tech failure, there is always like a backup. So that tech support who can, maybe live stream the Miro boards, or if you're getting interviews, if you plan to use Zoom, but if Zoom makes your participant uncomfortable, or they simply can't be bothered to download another app, offer them what's already on their phones. It can be WhatsApp, it can be FaceTime, because you really want people to feel comfortable first in your session. And if you do use FaceTime, make sure you have a backup audio recorder by the side. Don't trust your phone's audio recording. I learned that the hard way. So this is really just some high level. If you are interested in sort of like reading a bit more or get into this with interest of like more details, I mean, there's a few, books that I would recommend. These two you should have. Well, if you haven't read them, go and read them. If you have, you should have heard of them at least. So I mean, these books are sort of like quite foundational books about service design, but also there was a few chapters about research, and STBY has contributed in, I think, most of the research chapters anyway. And also I've promised to show you a platform of toolkits. So this is, I think the URL is on the top. This is the DIY toolkit. And so it's a free platform that we helped Nesta put together. I think there was like over 100 tools on there to help sort of like create a toolkit for people who wants to use service design into different projects. And there all the tools are sort of like categorized based on what you want to do. So if you go onto the website and if you go down to like, I want to study people, I want to understand behaviors, you will see a few tools, and then you can just get some inspirations on what you can do with these. So I think, time is up. So I think it's probably time for a few questions.
Great, thank you so much for that, Tien. That was fantastic, and I think just sets out a few bits of confirmation really around the importance at the very beginning of a project. The key in setting out on a good project is understanding the questions. What is it that you want to know as a team? What's going to really be the next thing you need to find out, and then how are you going to capture that data, whether it's design methods or other types of methods. And by following that and using frameworks to help you understand where you are in a project, so you're all on the same page too, both the team as well as the project partners that you're working with. Also, how research never stops. You're right at the beginning of the exploratory phase, but also using methods and thinking in ideating and developing ideas later on. And then the importance also of preparation when you are working with people, whether that be interviews or whether that be a workshop. The amount of time and thinking behind making it successful, making sure you get what you need from those is can't be underestimated. So those are the things that I kind of took away as big key themes. And in relation to that, there was a question early on from Joao, actually. It's kind of like quite a tricky question there, but it's connected to the questions bit. So are there any useful tips to find the essential research questions?
Yes, the essential research questions. I would say it's quite interesting because we actually it's actually quite common for clients to come to us with no research questions. And we actually spend a stage that we call scoping to actually help them finding that research question. So sometimes people come to us with an area of interest, let's say, and they go, oh, that looks like it's happening, but we don't know what's happening. Can you find out? And you go, okay, so what in it is you actually want me to find out? And I think it does comes down to a few different aspects. So, conversations with clients to understand if there is any hidden agenda, and so actually what their business might be heading, or if there's any change that their business is experiencing that made them getting interested in that area. To understand, I think that can be helpful to help you narrow down whether they're exploring new tech possibilities, or they're opening new markets, or they are trying to adapt their existing technology to like emergent needs. I mean, you need to sort of like with your clients understand like what they are actually trying to do to explore that area. Another thing is really the reality of time and budget. So you also say, well, it's all of that interesting things that you want to explore, but with this amount of money and this amount of time, what is realistic and to actually look into. And for student project, I think one thing I always advise students to do is you usually have a submit line anyway, like your module ends or you have to graduate. You actually know where a deadline is, and then you walk backwards to say, if I have to deliver my design on this day, how long do I give myself for design? How long do I give myself for testing? How long do I give myself to explore what is going on? And then probably that gives you some indication of how long you would actually have for your research phase to actually then scope down to say, actually, do I think I can answer this question? Is this question still too big? Do we need to narrow down further? I mean, it's a question. It's very difficult to answer without a project. I think this is the best I can say. Is really understanding where your client comes from, and understand what your research capacity is in hand. And then I think both of them influence how your research question, like how big your research question is. And also one thing is your research question is not the same as the questions you ask in the fieldwork. Remember that. So when you are actually designing your research, you might break down your research question into sub questions. And also with interviews, even with interviews, you need to think about different ways of approaching the answer you want. So obviously it's I think it was like one of these saying was like, if Ford asked people what they want, they would say faster horses. They would never have camera, then he would never invented car. So it's really about you need to translate your research questions into something that people can give you what you're after.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in your Spotify example of something as intangible about people's tastes in music. Yeah. So, you want to find out what people's tastes in music are and what they think about music, and figuring out in the research, what are the ways we can actually get people, trying to elicit from them, making intangible tangible. And that's also a lot of work to get that right, I guess, and experience to know how to manage that.
Yeah. I mean, this is really where where the testing part comes in. Is actually if you try that out, with your classmates and stuff, and you might in the beginning you have like 5 candidate exercises, but in the end you actually realize 3 of them works really well.
Great, thank you for that. So the next question, I had that one as well, Christoph. Does STBY also have experience in more sort of speculative future thinking client briefs?
Oh yes.
And does that change how you work, or change the methods? Good question, Christoph.
Yeah, I mean, good. Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think it changed the essence of the conversation for sure. It also changes, the way you present your design prompts. So because speculative design is not testing, right? You're not testing that thing that you're designing, but you're actually using your visual prompts to create a design that actually speaks about future. So the conversation is different, and the way you frame the thing you present to your participant is different. But again, how that presentation, how that conversation takes place, again, it can take many forms. It can be, it can be in a one-to-one conversation. It can be in a one-to-many conversations. It can happen in real life. It can happen in even exhibitions. So yeah, I mean, it does change when you design your questions and when you frame your conversations that you expect to take place with your participants. It also changes how you present your findings to your client, because the speculative design outcome is not necessarily saying your company needs to design this thing, but it's actually the conversation that this thing stimulates. What does it mean for your business? What's your business objectives, or what's your tech development objective? So again, you need to translate that. It's different from like a concept testing, where we tested this and then you can say, actually you need to make that journey this way or that way. So I think that the nature of the conversation changes. I mean, technically the methods, I mean, like I said, methods, form follows what you want. Yeah.
So have you got maybe an example of a method that you might use to kind of speculate or provoke somebody's question? Sorry about that. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, there was a Dutch project where we actually studied sort of like elderly people's sort of expectations of around housing, but also sort of like response to aging society, how sort of like elderly people wanted to live their life in the future. And there was a few sort of like speculative films that was made based on the interviews. And then we actually almost like with the elderly people that we involved, we made a few sort of like futuristic little films looking at a few possibilities of what elderly people's life might look like in the future. So I think there was, one about actually virtual reality. So that was sort of like, so I mean, the outcome of the research is actually a few of these films. And then I think, so the design is not like we are creating a solution for the problem that these elderly people were experiencing, but we research with them to understand their experience and their like expectations for future, and then actually make these speculative late of future into a film. There was a film, there was a book, there was also a performance in a conference where we used a lot of material there to actually stimulate conversations around actually what's people's expectations of future life when they get old.
And what that might mean for an organization, how they might have to adapt and think about future opportunities. Yeah. Great, thank you for that. So Rita's got a question here. How do you approach designing for the human as opposed to designing for the client or the consumer? So some of our students now, they're working with project partners, and it's getting that balance, isn't it? And how you work with
I mean, it's hard. It's hard, but I think from our end, we always have a clear understanding that, first of all, the stakeholders are human. Don't forget, they're I think what's it is about making connections. So it's about always we represent the perspective of the user, or sometimes the customer, but also it's about making that relevant to the business, what the business is trying to do.
Yeah, so it's having the empathy for both sides, having the empathy for the citizens, as well as having empathy for the stakeholders in an organization, and and
and it's also, for a lot of public service projects we did, it's also almost like you're creating a way of having a conversation where public service users and the providers can have a conversation on equal terms. And it's not about who is more important, but it is about the situation we have here, and that there are problems that we're all aware of, and how you can actually empower, give both sides the language and the tool that for them to focus on the problem and the situation, rather than what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Alessandro is asking, are there projects which in the middle of development required you to completely change your approach, either reformatting or scrapping all the work you've created?
I think not really. As an agency, we charge for the hour we spend on the work. So it's very, and this is why sometimes when the scoping phase that I mentioned was very important, is that we do have conversations with clients, and a lot of conversations is spent before a contract is signed, and to actually agree on this is the scope, this is the question, this is the sample size, this is the hours, this is the the 3 milestones that will be delivered on this day, that day, and that day. So it's for clients, for our sides to turn around and say, actually, that's I have to scrap everything before a cost. It's a cost. So it's. You do all the work beforehand to avoid that situation. And also it's about communicating with your client all the way through. And that's why we would actually invite clients and stakeholders to fieldwork sessions, to analysis sessions, is to actually make the research process a lot more transparent and a lot more co-creation, not just for the participants, but for the stakeholders as well, so that they are engaged with the process and they know where certain statement comes from.
Yeah, it's all about communication, constant communication.
So if something changes, and if something has to change, there is a reason for it. And people, at least your core clients, should be aware of something coming their way. And if that will happen, and that's why visual documentations, evidence is so important, that you have the evidence to support your claim.
Yeah, perfect. So having that data as a team and being able to show it as evidence and validation at any point. Another kind of a big question, actually, how do you plan the research schedule at the early start of the project?
Well, you sort of look at the timeline and the budget, and then basically start from there. So usually one of the sort of very early stage thing is, and you need to discuss this with your clients as well, is do you want a big splash or do you want a couple of deep dives? So you can, by big splash, I mean you can engage with a lot of people in one session. But that means with each person you spend less time. But that means we say within a 2-hour workshop session you can reach 7 people. Or if you do 7 individual interviews, then obviously timely it adds up, costly it adds up as well. But with each person, you have a full-on 2 hour with each individuals. So it's often one of the first decisions you have to make based on your research questions, and also based on, I mean, the resource, how many researchers you can actually have to run whatever you dream to run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. Got one here from Esther. I think it's one of your current interns. Thank you for the talk. Wondering if STBY do testing of the workshop or prototype within the team first to see if it works. And are there any tips for improving these activities before meeting participants?
Yeah, we always test. I mean, the good thing is we have 2 offices. So often the London team tests on Amsterdam team, and Amsterdam team tests on the London team. Yeah, I think if possible, we always test, if not the entire workshop, maybe parts of it that we feel more unsure about.
I think I think we often say to our students as well, testing with each other's, with different teams, to make sure that it all makes sense, that it runs smoothly, and not to be underestimated.
Yeah.
And we've got a question here: how would you recruit the users for deep interviews or workshop, especially expert users? Because it can be hard to get people involved, particularly for some help.
Yeah, so usually there are, well, I would say 3 ways for recruitment. So, I mean, there are professional recruiters out there who, spend 9 to 5 recruiting people. Obviously, that comes with a cost. And from our part, usually, if that's the method we'll go down, I mean, the cost, obviously, we pass it on to the client. There's another method that's called snowballing. So basically, you try to use your network or a network that you can find, a forum or whatever, and then you post a message there, and then see, if someone replies, and then from that person you say, can you recommend me a few other people? So it snowballs over. One thing about snowballing is that you need to be a bit aware of the limit, because people usually socialize with people from similar backgrounds. So if you're looking for, sort of like a good representation, you need to be mindful of the people you snowball with. And then a third method is sometimes the clients themselves have a customer base or a user base that they would be able to provide to us. Or I mean, it doesn't have to be customers. Sometimes in sort of like charities, they have an email list or whatever, and you can ask them to help you sort of like recruit via people that they are already in touch with. Yeah.
Brilliant, great, good, very clear, good advice there. Another one here, final one here. Thank you, Chin, super inspiring talk. I'm wondering what the outcome was of the Spotify project that you led through those diverse qualitative research. So the kinds of things that came out of that.
Well, all I can say is, I mean, the one about mine's like music taste. So that was translated into a few design principles that they then rolled into, I think, part of their sort of like a branding design language that has a lot more sort of like a different experiments. I mean, we actually have done like work after that, looking more sort of at the branding side and of it. But that's like basically often one research leads to more research. And that's probably a simple way to summarize that project. Where the other project is they were developing basically a new functionality on the app. And the result is a report and a few design recommendations for that new concept. And I mean, it's basically being developed into the app itself.
So I guess just different projects, different deliverables have different processes.
Yeah.
Some might be complete propositions and others might just be inspiration for developing features. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that inspiring talk, and I think lots of ideas and advice there for everyone listening right now. And I mean, as ever, the proof is in the pudding, and every project's going to be different. The scope's going to be different, and it's always going to be. It's good to have heard you say how your team feel like they get lost 3 times a day, because it can feel very very scary when you're not quite sure what the directions are. But if everyone follows the approach that you've kind of outlined here, I think, and with the experience, it should get a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, it does. But also, I mean, I think one of the good things about student project is that you have the privilege to fail. So be experimental, be bold, and also always remember you have tutors and teachers there to support you through the process. It's it's a learning process.
It is.
Yeah, you're not charging for your hours, so it doesn't. Yeah, the pressure is not that high.
Exactly. Well, thank you again. I think you've given up your time for our crew. And so thanks again. We'll welcome you back in the summer to our show so you can see some of the results
of our
students' projects. And we'll keep in touch with you, Chin, and all the best for
thank you.
work. Thanks, Chin, and thanks everyone for coming. Have a good day. Bye.